He woke up 162 years later. In a museum in space. Archivist Sereth did not believe in ghosts, but the museum hissed at night like something learning to breathe. The Vault of Vanished Biologies lay in orbit 9, a lightless ring that circled the warm star of Hykra Prime. Every window was a promise not to look out. Every door sealed with a beetle's click. In the inner chambers, crystal columns held samples, seed banks, fossil spines, faded feathers and stasis fields like snow suspended mid-fall. Hykra had built the vault to keep records of what they had failed to keep alive. Sereth's job, if phrased without ceremony, was mourning with spreadsheets. Her frills were small and bookish, never bright, a scholar's crown. Her hands moved with the economy of someone who fought entropy for a living. This month she was cataloging the Oolite cluster's lost microfauna, escorting a parade of glassy, flecked, plankton ghosts into the database. She had not expected the crate. It arrived on a freight skiff at 2:13, stamped with a war-dead registry number older than both of her parents. The crate was scuffed and quiet, damp with starlight, the sort of object that made other archivists look away in case history leaked out and touched them. Sereth signed for it. She always did. If something had come this far to be remembered, she would not send it back. She brought the crate to Bay 12, where the air had the medicinal chill of a careful grief. She cut the old seals and peeled back the lid. Inside lay a capsule, long and built like an oath. Frost traced silver veins across the transparent cover. Beneath the frost, beneath decades, maybe centuries, of silence, Sereth saw a shape that froze her hands in place. A primate. Not a simian of the Hykra woods, not one of the ornamental forest dancers her grandparents had told stories about. The proportions were wrong, limbs longer, skull different, torso thicker. She knew the silhouette from restricted files and propaganda from a different era. Human. Impossible, Sereth whispered, because people always whisper to themselves when their world tips. The capsule's readout flickered, as if surprised to have an audience again. Indicators drifted from crimson into amber, then held there like wary eyes. A small panel, glued over with a War Department sticker, pulsed faintly with the universal language of machines. I am not dead. Sereth could have called security. She could have called her supervisor. She could have called the Ministry of Memory, who would have called other ministries until a dense, choking hierarchy formed over the capsule like cloud cover. Instead, she pressed her palm to the status monitor and let the system map the tremor of her pulse. I am Archivist Sereth of Hykra, she said, not to the capsule but to herself, like a vow. You have arrived late. I will not be late for you. The human slept on, eyes closed, mouth slightly parted. The frost made a thin halo of him. He could have been 30. He could have been a century. In the Starfall Wars, humans had become a word said with teeth, cunning, loud, ruin. The treaties and reparations had softened the word but did not smooth it. The official histories called them extinct. Sereth switched the capsule's output from military black box to civilian diagnostic. The screen unfurled data with shaky dignity, metabolic markers, cryo clock, damage log. She read, translating technical cruelty into the language of care. His heart, strong but starving. His muscles, wasted but ready to remember. His lungs, cleaned and recleaned by automated purges, as if the machine had become his anxious parent. His name, redacted beneath a smear of corrupted cipher. She checked the power reserve. 2 days of battery left before the capsule performed the ancient calculus of triage and shut itself down to save what it could of itself. Sereth leaned over the frost and spoke quietly, as if the capsule could listen. You are the last place we would find a human, she said. And you are found anyway. Her frills lifted with a decision. She turned off the hallway camera. Then she turned another thing on, a little stubbornness that had gotten her scolded in school and promoted in work. She began. Revival protocol was a symphony of cautions. Sereth hummed it to herself as she prepped the bay. Warm the room 4 degrees, flood the air with moisture, stand a med drone by with an oxygen mix that wouldn't drown the human's blood in kindness. She read the old studies about human thermoregulation, about mammalian panic when waking into strangeness. She pulled a blanket from a visiting scholar's cot and shook it out like an apology. The capsule argued with her in little ways, an error chime here, a warning pulse there. It had been loyal to its orders for a span of years that made loyalty look foolish. When she opened the emergency command field, she saw the line that had kept him in ice. Abort revival. Hold until contact by fleet. No fleet was coming. The fleets were museums now, ossified into parades and plaques. Sereth overrode the line. Protocol required 2 keys turned by 2 people. Sereth held both keys in one hand and turned them anyway. She would accept the reprimand. She would accept worse. Steam stitched the air as the capsule misted its own frozen innards. Sensors ticked from amber to green like careful smiles. The human's fingers twitched, small, then larger, as if discovering fingers again. When the lid unsealed, the sound was not a hiss but the breath of someone finally saying yes. His eyes opened the way a door remembers it opens. He blinked. He lifted his head 2 centimeters and stopped when the world proved heavier than memory. Panic reached for him. Sereth met it halfway. "Listen," she said, voice low and certain, friend voice, river voice. "You are safe. Cryostasis ending. You will feel heat and ache and a loud heart. That is life returning. Breathe as slowly as you can." He focused on her like a swimmer sighting shore. His eyes were brown, but in that first moment they looked black, pupils full to draw the new light. He tried to speak. His throat revolted. The med-drone leaned in with a humidified oxygen flow and the patience of a good nurse. "Water," he croaked on the 3rd attempt. The word hung between them like a confession. Sereth lifted the cup. He drank. Some of it went on his chin. He ignored it, as the newly alive often do. When he had enough, he exhaled a breath that sounded like a ship dropping anchor. "Where?" His voice failed politely and waited its turn. "Where am I?" "A museum," Sereth said, because lying now would make later truths harder. "In orbit above a world called Hykra Prime. You were recovered on an unmanned skiff. Your capsule's log is damaged. I am Archivist Sereth." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was a smile there that had clearly survived other catastrophes. "Archivist," he said, with the slight irony of someone who had woken to a curator, not a soldier. I think I'm Eli. Eli Navarro. If that still fits." "Eli," she repeated, and the name settled in the room like a weight in the right place. "Human," he added, in case she had missed it. "I notice," she said, and found herself smiling back, which was not in any protocol but felt like the safest thing she had done all night. He tried to sit. The med-drone vetoed it with a soft tone and a gentle hand that wasn't a hand. Sereth adjusted the bed to meet him halfway, lifting him without asking his muscles to remember everything at once. "How long?" he asked. Sereth did not give him a number yet. Numbers could bruise. "Long enough for your capsule to develop a personality," she said. His laugh was a rough, small thing, but real. He studied her, crown, eyes, the way her hands didn't quite relax. He saw the edges of the truth and didn't reach for them yet. "You revived me alone?" "I did," she said. "There are forms to file. There will be consequences." "For you?" His brow furrowed. "Because you helped me? Because I disobeyed a war order that survived its war?" Sereth folded her arms, then unfolded them. The habit felt like a door opening and closing in a draft. "I would prefer to answer to the living." Eli watched her then in the way of people who choose what to admire. "Then thank you," he said, simple as gravity. It was not love. It was recognition, which is the root that love grows from when given water. The first hours were a choreographed mercy. Sereth fed him warmth in sips, broth that tasted like mercy, then thicker sustenance, then fruit, the kind that taught the mouth it belonged to a body. She kept the lights low and the room quiet. The med-drone monitored, patient as a rock. Between tasks, she recorded date, time, vitals, words said, everything the ministry would demand. But she added a second column only she would see, small human things the official ledger would miss. 247, smiled at a bad joke about the capsule having seniority in the room. 312, asked for the Medrone's name, apologized to it when it didn't have one. 340, thanked the water aloud, like it had done him a personal favor. Your species always did this, Sereth said, when his eyes opened more fully and she felt he could hear the gentle teasing under the observation. Talk to objects like they were in the room with you. We like to practice on things that can't leave, Eli said. Low-stakes kindness. Does it work? Sometimes the things stay anyway, he said, and touched the capsule's lid, which hummed once in something like contentment. When he slept, he did it like a fight he was finally allowed to lose. Sereth stood in the doorway and watched the rise and fall of his chest. She felt the shape of the night in her own body, the adrenal tremor, the relief that arrived exhausted, the old grief her work had taught her to pretend she no longer carried. She let herself feel it. He should wake to an honest archivist. Her terminal chimed. 3 messages from Supervisor Vale, ornamented with the polite cruelty of bureaucracy. Unusual activity in Bay 12. Please confirm receipt of incoming classified crate. Reminder, any entity of war provenance must be processed under Statute 19H. Sereth muted the terminal. The museum hissed again, settling, or remembering. The cryo-chilled air smelled faintly of metal, salt, and thawing fruit. She thought about history as it had been written for her, humans as a riddle with a gun, as the incandescent danger of improvisation, as a species who loved too loudly and broke what they touched. Some of it had been true. Wars are not famous for improving our opinion of one another. But the files she had read in secret, letters, songs, a cookbook someone had annotated with jokes, told another story alongside the first. Humanity talking to the things that couldn't leave and making them stay anyway. Sereth returned to the bed. Eli breathed the way people do when they no longer fear the next breath won't come. She sat in the chair beside him and, because neither of them had anyone else in the room, she kept watch. The second day, Eli could sit without bargaining with gravity. The Medrone released him from the oxygen flow with the ceremonial cluck of a machine washing its hands. Sereth brought a tray and announced, "First breakfast." "Is there a second?" Eli asked, instantly. "Your kind are famous for it." "Then I forgive history for a minute," he said, and lifted the spoon. They ate in parallel, he food, she slices of information he could manage. Dates and anchors, not oceans. "You went into cryo near the end of the starfall period," she said. "Your capsule clock suggests a long time. But clocks spin when scared. I won't lie to you later. Today, it's enough that you're here." He nodded. "I don't need the number yet. I can feel it in my bones." He paused, and she watched a thought move through him like a shadow. "Is Earth blue?" Sereth said quickly, because she would not let that sentence end with a knife. "Blue and loud. Not the center, not a power, but alive. You will see it if you want to," she added gentler. "But this orbit is far from there." Some of the tension in his jaw released. "Okay," he said, and meant the word the way humans do, not consent to reality, but a willingness to meet it. They walked the bay together, hospital slow. Sereth let him lean on the wall where the wall would tolerate it. He touched nothing he shouldn't. He asked for names and she gave them, glad to put them in someone else's mouth. The bioluminescent reef fragments in column 7. The compressed birdsong from a moon where the birds had learned silence to live. The seeds that would sprout with a little heat and a promise. "You keep what's gone?" he asked. "We keep what survived long enough to be collected," Sereth said. "We keep what people would rather forget. You keep the guilty things," he said softly. "That too." He stopped in front of a fossil jaw displayed like a small, righteous moon. "Do you ever bring anything back?" Sereth's hands did the door open door close, and she didn't pretend she didn't notice. "Revival is not our mandate," she said. "But sometimes a thing wants to live so loudly our rules go quiet." He looked at her. "Not the jaw." Not the fossil. Her. And me? You were loud enough, she said. He grinned then, and it felt like sunrise in a room without windows. By afternoon, the ministry knew. Of course they did. An old crate moved, a camera blinked, a supervisor woke into a need to be relevant. Sereth expected the call. She kept the line open while she adjusted Eli's room to look less like an accident and more like a plan. Archivist Sereth, Supervisor Vale said, whose voice always smelled like polished metal. We have a report of unauthorized access. Authorized by me, Sereth said. Your authority does not extend to revival of entities marked as belligerent. Do you understand the gravity? I do, she said. It's why I didn't set the room to 12%. Silence. Vale did not have a sense of humor. He had vacuums. You will hold the entity, Vale said finally, under Statute 19H until a retrieval team arrives. Do not interact beyond vital care. Do not provide historical context. Do not treat him like a bomb, Sereth said gently. I read the statute. You will follow it. Here was the door. Here was the hinge. I will follow the parts that keep him alive, she said. And I will file forms. Sereth. Yes, Supervisor? You are fond of rules, Archivist. Do not choose a human over your career. Sereth looked at Eli, who was studying the med drone like a man trying to make a friend out of a ceiling fan. She thought about careers and their small altars. She thought about choosing. I am choosing our museum's mission, she said. To keep what is almost lost from being lost. If your retrieval team can do that better than I can, I will hand them the blanket and the broth when they arrive. You are making a mistake, Vale said. Possibly, Sereth said, and closed the call with the respect of an executioner. Eli watched her cross the room. He did not ask what the supervisor had said. He had been human under governments. He could guess. Am I trouble? He asked, when she came close enough that lies would bruise worse. Yes, Sereth said. But trouble we can use. What do you need from me? Stay alive, she said. Eat. Rest. When people arrive with too many badges, let me translate. Also, teach me what your name feels like when someone who loves you says it. He blinked. For a moment the old war maps, the propaganda, the cautionary tales, everything that had taught him he was a mouth of gunpowder and polite company, fell away. Like a joke I've heard before, he said. Like I'm late and welcome anyway. Sereth tucked the blanket around his legs and nodded, because yes lived in her teeth. The retrieval team would need a few cycles. Bureaucracy required time to lace its boots before marching. Sereth used the window. Do you want to see the vault? She asked. Is that allowed? Eli asked. No, she said. But it is right. He leaned on her arm, carefully, reverently, like he had been raised to believe in dignifying help. She guided him down the corridor that smelled like sealed history. Lights came up as they walked, polite little rounds of attention. The museum hummed for them, or they were learning to hear it. At column 23, Sereth lifted a hand and the glass cleared to reveal a stack of notebooks bound in cracked orange. The covers were stamped in a language that looked like rain on sand. Inside, sketches of fish that grew wings for 2 weeks every year, then forgot how to swim. The pages had marginalia in 3 inks, each a different voice in an argument with the sea. Who were they? Eli whispered. Gone, Sereth said. But they were briefly very good at catching impossible animals. He laughed, quiet, in that way grateful people do when gratitude is heavier than breath. I wish. He stopped, embarrassed at the audacity of wanting in a room built for what had not gotten what it wanted. Want, Sereth said, so it would be permitted. I wish your people had known us at our best, he said. We didn't even know ourselves at our best, Sereth said. But we kept notes. They stopped before the controversial case, which had its own plaque explaining why it existed, and why some people hated that it did. Inside, a human jacket, worn at the elbows, a ring of keys with a strip of tape labeled Navarro, home, a photograph of a boy with a dog and a woman whose smile said work first, then cake. Eli stared like he could outstare time. His hand rose to his mouth and stayed there, a shelter against the weather no one else could see. That's mine, he said, voice thin with the mathematical horror of it. Not that set. But that set. We recovered that bundle after a battle at Telshire, Sereth said. We didn't know the names. We labeled it with the place and the feeling. What feeling? She could have lied and said. Tragedy. She could have said. History. Truth is often small. Waiting, she said. The feeling of a door that should open. He nodded fiercely, the motion of someone agreeing with the universe while begging it to be kinder. May I? He gestured. You may, Sereth said over the museum's soft disapproval. He placed his fingers against the glass. The keys gleamed as if relieved to be remembered by the hand they had missed. He laughed again, a sound overwhelmed by its own gratitude. My mother used to label everything, he said. Tupperware, keys, cousins at reunions. She said names are how we stop losing what we love. Sereth stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Then let's name what you have left, she said. He looked at her. Right now? His voice was a little wild. Here? Yes, she said. Now is when humans are best. That was the first time he reached for her without thinking. His hand found the brace of her forearm and held. She did not move away. The museum breathed around them, the hissing kind of blessing that is not holy until you need it. They arrived on the third day. Black uniforms designed to look neutral and failing. Badges like insects pinned to a shirt. Supervisor veil in a different tone of disappointment. A medic with delicate hands and a glance that said, I will not hurt you if I can help it. Sereth had arranged the bay like a thesis. Eli upright, fed calm. Medical reading stable. A list of protocols she had followed even while ignoring others. A petition for humanitarian custody in case they tried to move him like cargo. Her frills were not bright, they never were, but they stood tall. The team leader cleared his throat as if speaking might entangle him. Human designated Navarro Eli. He read from a slate, mispronouncing it Navarro H. You are under temporary protective hold pending status determination. Do you understand your position? Eli, who had endured revival, longing, and soup in the last 72 hours, looked at Sereth. She nodded. Tell the truth and make it yours. I understand you think I'm a problem, he said, voice steady enough to pour. I'd like to be a person. Silence. The medic's mouth quirked, the dangerous kind of sympathy that makes careers complicated. Per statute 19H, Vale said, as if the words were a stretcher. You will be transferred to a secure facility for evaluation. Archivist Sereth, you will produce all records of revival and contact. Already prepared, Sereth said, and handed him 2 slates, one for the official record, one for the small human things. The team leader took them, glanced, frowned. What is this second column? Observations, Sereth said. Useful for care. Laughed at a joke about the capsule having seniority. He read aloud before catching himself. Not germane. Germane to treating him like a person, Sereth said. We do not have a statute for treating humans like persons, Vale said, and the room changed temperature by a degree only the honest felt. Eli did not flinch. Then write one, he suggested. The team leader blinked. The medic looked at the floor. Sereth inhaled like drawing a bow. Supervisor, she said. We request to keep him on site under museum care while your ministry debates a statute it should have written a generation ago. He is medically stable. He is culturally significant. He is not a weapon and not a relic. He is alive. That makes him ours. Ours? Vale said, with a politician's disdain for pronouns used without permission. Ours, she said again, and it was not a threat. It was an invitation to be decent. The team leader shifted, then decided what kind of person he would be for the rest of his life. We can authorize a 48-hour hold under Article 7F, he said carefully. Humanitarian observation in place of transport. After that, Eli said, I'll still be a person. No one wrote it down. Everyone heard it. They gave him a translator, the kind clipped behind the ear like a shy jewel. The device warmed to his skin and began the awkward courtship of learning a tongue. Sereth sat across from him at the small metal table and placed her own translator on the surface between them. I'm fluent, she said, but let's teach your device my tone. The machine dictionary is sterile. I want you to understand the way I mean things. So we're calibrating for sarcasm, he said. And for care, she said. They began with names and nouns that already knew each other: water, door, sleep, museum, supervisor, friend. They moved to verbs: keep, choose, remember. She offered him Hikera's words for grief you share to make it lighter, and the relief that arrives too late but still helps. He gave her human phrases like give it a minute, and I'm on it, and we'll make do. When the translator stumbled, they laughed. When it sang, they smiled the tired smiles of teachers who like their work. He wrote his name for her in 3 scripts that had mattered to him: schoolbook English, a grandmother's cursive he'd copied in a summer of lemonade and cheap pens, the blocky, functional letters of mission briefs. She wrote hers in the flowing glyphs the museum favored and, more privately, in the small, scratchy hand she used for diaries she never reread. Sereth, he said, careful, finding the bones of it. What does it mean? Old word, she said. To keep a story whole? He grinned. Then you're overqualified. Eli? He looked down, suddenly shy. It means a tree? Or ascension? Depends on which ancient died first. Then you're the right kind of complicated, she said. The translator chirped triumph for both of them. They ignored it and kept talking. The museum hummed and did not tell them to hush. When they were tired, Sereth stood to leave and Eli reached without thinking, hand brushing her wrist. Not a grab, a continued conversation. Stay? He asked, then added quickly. You don't have to. I want to, she said. So she did, and the night hissed like a living thing, and the rules stood in the corridor and waited their turn. Break time equals 0. 5s. /. On the 4th morning, Sereth told him the number. She did it with the care of someone handing over a sharp object to a beloved. Eli, she said, your capsule's clock was close. You've been in cryo 162 years. He closed his eyes. He breathed. He nodded, not because the fact was kind but because it was true and he had asked for it. My mother is gone, he said. My keys don't fit any lock. Yes, Sereth said. My city is different. Yes. Earth is older, I guess. Also louder, she said, and let a smile be permission. He exhaled and it shook, but it didn't break. Okay, he said, that human spell? Then I want 2 things. Name them. I want to speak to someone from Earth, he said. Anyone. A bus driver. A baker. I want to hear the weather. Done, she said, already assembling a plan in her head that involved 2 colleagues, a favor, and a comms hack you could pretend was an error if asked by the right person. And I want. He stopped, embarrassed by the audacity of hope. I want to stay here for as long as we can get away with it. With me, she said, helping him say the truth out loud. With you, he said, and looked at her not like a miracle but like water after a desert. Sereth, who had spent her life naming vanished things and ensuring they remained named, did something new. She let the future into the room. I will fight for that, she said. He looked relieved and terrified in equal parts. The emotional uniform of humans in love with anything. He started to say something brave or foolish or both, then stopped because a chime rang in the corridor like good news taught to be quiet. Visitors, Sereth said. Earth, if my friend did not lose her nerve. Eli straightened, smoothed his blanket, and turned his face toward the door as if toward weather. Sereth watched him assemble himself, watched him choose dignity without a mirror, watched him warm the room that had not been designed for his species. Humanity, she thought, a word that had been taught to her with caution and contempt and footnotes. Humanity, she thought again, revising, and found her mouth shape it like a vowel. The woman on the screen had silver hair in a messy knot, and a face that looked like it had been saved by laughter more than once. Her apron read Toledo bred in English and hieroglyphs someone had clearly added later with a careful hand. "Is this thing live?" she asked a little too loudly. "I was told there'd be a delay." "Ms. Imani," Sereth said, shoulders lowering with the relief of plans that work. "Thank you for answering on short notice. I don't hang up on history," Imani said. Then she saw Eli and her voice changed. It didn't get softer, it got truer. "Well, look at you, honey. You're the wrong kind of miracle, but I'll take you." Eli made a sound that was half laugh, half small sob. "Could you?" He swallowed. "Could you tell me what the air feels like?" Imani stepped outside without theatrics and lifted the camera. The image tilted toward an Ohio morning, wet, pale sun, the exhale of traffic, a kid's shout, a train's distant moan, leaves doing their secular prayers. "It's humid," she said. "The kind that makes your shirt think about betrayal. Smells like yeast and hot metal and somebody oversalted a sidewalk pretzel. The geese are being jerks. They will not apologize." Eli closed his eyes and held the description to his face like a cloth. Sereth watched him drink it. She watched his shoulders lower, a little. She watched Imani, across a star, give him a small, fierce piece of home like it cost her nothing. "We named a loaf after the treaty that stopped us being idiots about Mars," Imani added. "It's got sesame on it. We call it Common Good. It sells out on Saturdays." "Thank you," Eli said, voice steadier. "Thank you. That helps. Come by Sunday," Imani said like a dare to fate. "We'll find you a seat." The call ended before anyone could ruin it with policy. Eli wiped his face without apology. Sereth handed him a square cloth from her pocket, and didn't comment on the embroidery that betrayed her fondness for little domestic graces. "Okay," he said again. "Okay. I can be here and still be human." "You are very good at it," she said. "And you're very good at helping." "I'm an archivist," she said. "We keep what matters. Sometimes we keep it warm." He laughed. "Then keep me," he said, and the room opened like a map. The 48-hour extension became a week through loopholes, paperwork, and the steady application of decency. The team leader discovered he liked being the kind of person who allowed care. The medic delivered an extra blanket and did not log it. Supervisor Vale sulked into a less obstructive shape. Sereth and Eli developed a routine that felt like the opposite of war. Morning language, afternoon walks paced to celebration rather than pity, evening history traded like cards nobody wanted to win with. He told her about engines and boredom and the way small joys saved a mission more surely than any weapon, contraband music shared over low speakers, a window cleaned so you could see a dot of home, a joke pinned to a bulkhead that lasted longer than a chief engineer. She told him about Hikara art that used rain as a brush, about how her people once made museums to keep their hands from shaking, about the day she learned a fossil was just a long story told by a patient rock. He was funny, not with the desperation of a man trying to be liked but with the gratitude of a man glad to be here. She was kind in the way of water, not dramatic, not performative, but relentless. He stopped waking with his heart already racing toward a disaster. She stopped feeling like a witness that would never be allowed to touch. On the 8th night, they stood in the dark and looked at the blue star of Hikara through a permitted window in a restricted corridor. "Tell me your worst day," he said, not as a test but as an intimacy. She did. Not about him. About the specimen that arrived too late, and how she catalogued it anyway because grief wants names. About the supervisor who told her she cared too much, and the grandmother who told her there is no such thing. He told her his. Not about war. About a small argument with his mother about a label on a jar, and how he had been petty in a way you only are with people you believe you'll have forever to repair. About how the argument outlived her. About how he had kept the label for a month in his pocket, and then, inevitably, lost it. "We could make a new one," Sereth said without thinking. "What did it say?" "Cumin," he said, and then laughed, astonished, delighted at the small mercy, the worst day reduced to a spice. They stood with their foreheads nearly touching the glass. A museum hissed. A planet turned. Two people did not fix history. They made a present worth the trouble. Sereth lifted a hand as Corinth did when asking to cross a line with respect. Eli met it with fingers that had learned the shape of her. "Consent?" she asked, a word she had never said as a liturgy before this week and would now say as often as seasoning. "Yes," he said, and in the dark they practiced the simplest kiss their anatomies allowed, her forehead resting against his for a long, certain moment that claimed nothing and promised everything. It could not last without a fight. The ministry demanded a status determination: relic, prisoner, guest. The categories were old and wrong, they were what the ministry had. Sereth stood before the panel with a slate full of numbers and a mouth full of story. "He is not a weapon. He is not a specimen. He is a citizen of Earth displaced beyond any statute you have. He is also beloved," she said, ignoring the internal warning that the word was unprofessional. "We are not debating the safety of an object. We are deciding what kind of people we are." Vale sputtered. The team leader cleared his throat. The medic's expression hid a prayer to no one. In the gallery, a handful of museum staff stood not as employees but as witnesses. Eli watched from a permitted screen, face steady, as if he were holding a plank steady while she crossed. "Article 12, the panel chair said finally, permits temporary sanctuary for entities of cultural relevance who pose no immediate threat, pending further review." "Sanctuary is not custody," Sereth said. "Sanctuary is community. Do not play with words," Vale snapped. "I am an archivist," she said. "Words are my tools. I am very careful with them." They voted. It came down to one person who had not planned to be brave, and then was. The panel declared Eli Geston's sanctuary, a term that had existed on paper for a century, and had never been used. The room changed temperature. The world did whatever worlds do when something old finally does what it promised. Eli watched Sereth on the screen. In his eyes, relief and awe were the same color. She walked back to Bay 12 with a stride a poet would have liked, and tried not to run. They gave him a small apartment in the museum ring with a window pretending not to be a camera. Sereth moved slowly through his space, honoring his right to make it his. He put the ring of keys on a hook by the door anyway because rituals don't care if the locks are fiction. He labeled the jar cumin and wrote the word twice, cumin and cumin, because he was exactly that sort of human. He cooked for her from museum rations, and made them taste like not museum. He learned the Hykra market days by smell, the sweet rot of river fruit, the metallic purr of fresh tools. He laughed with the staff and apologized to the drones, and wrote a letter to a baker on Earth he had never met, timed to arrive with a loaf called common good. The museum's hiss changed. It became less like a breathing lesson and more like breath. Visitors began bringing small offerings to the case with the jacket and the keys, a drawing of a dog, a folded paper label that said basil, a tiny jar of cumin some child had filched from a kitchen and wanted to give back to history. Sereth instituted a new policy, the ledger of living gifts. When people left something for the human case, she logged it with the same fervor she saved for fossils, because she had decided to be an archivist of kindness too. Eli added a shelf to the case, not inside, but nearby. He labeled it Promises We Can Keep. The shelf filled with approvals of small courage, a vow to call a grandmother, a note that said I will show up to my friends' reading even if I'm tired, ticket stubs, receipts, little anchors. "Humans always make altars," Sereth said, amused and reverent. "We need places to put down our hopes so we can use our hands," he said. They slept, separately, with the door between their rooms propped open not as invitation but as proof of belonging. They woke and counted the days together in coffee spoons and starlight. They kissed with foreheads and learned to fit their different balances into one walk. When they fought, because people in love eventually do, they did it like archivists, with good labeling and an index of what mattered most. On the 20th day, Sereth took Eli to see Hykera Prime's rain used as a brush. On a plaza of white stone, artists led the cloud banks with old tricks and small machines. Water fell in patterns, drew lines on special sand that held shape just long enough to be seen. Eli tilted his face to the rain and laughed like someone given a second mouth. "That sound," Sereth said, memorizing it for the museum she kept inside her chest. "I will make a case for it." "You already did," he said, and touched her frills with a question that had been answered 100 times and would be answered 1,000 more. "Consent." "Yes." And life continued. They returned to Earth in the 70th day, because hope means movement. The museum negotiated, Earth acquiesced, law bent where kindness pressed. The descent burned, as all returns do, and at the bottom there were geese and bread and a woman named Imani who hugged Eli as if he were her nephew and then made him lift a 20-kilo sack of flour so she could laugh at his pretend complaints. The air smelled like hot metal and pretzels, and a minor disaster nearby someone was handling without permission. Eli cried in a way that made the crying children stop to watch and then feel better about themselves. Sereth handed him a cloth. Imani handed him a loaf. The geese withheld forgiveness. They walked past the river that pretended it remembered him. He pressed his hand to a bridge rail, then laughed, then clipped a padlock engraved Navarro, home, also elsewhere, because he had decided he would not be a man of single places anymore. At a small ceremony under a pinched, faithful sky, the museum chair and the Earth ambassador said words about compassion and second chances and cooperative futures. Eli said words about bread and labels and laughing with the people you survive with. Sereth said the word that had built her, keep. Then, because she had learned from humanity, and because he had learned from her, they spoke no grand goodbye to the world. They said what both planets had earned. "See you soon," Sereth said to Earth. "Keep me a seat," Eli said to Hykera. They left doors open. Years write their own indexes. The ledger of living gifts became a wing. Visitors learned to leave something and to take something, the way courage grows when traded. Eli taught a course called Maintenance as Love. Sereth ran a workshop titled Keeping the Future. People left laughing. People left with lists. They had bad weeks, illness, bureaucracy, a day when a fossil arrived with a story too heavy for one belly. They had good weeks, rain caught in perfect lines, a letter from a child who had labeled everything in their room and found it easier to clean. They never stopped asking consent. They never stopped saying okay as a spell. They never stopped being, separately and together, the last place you'd expect to find something tender, and the exact place it belongs. In the end, courage was a quiet practice, not a shout. It was writing down small promises and keeping them when no one watched. It was an archivist breaking a rule without shattering it. It was a man from a lost century and a woman from a careful world choosing to be each other's museum, a place where what matters is kept warm, named, and shown. On an ordinary morning in the museum ring, Eli labeled a jar cumin and set it next to another labeled hope. Sereth laughed, kissed his forehead, and added a third label, bread for friends. They went to work. And the museum, which had once only hissed at night, breathed all day like a living thing, because it had learned, at last, that keeping the past and loving the present are not different jobs at all, just the same devotion pointed in two directions, along the same road of light they kept choosing, together, again and again and again. The end.